and ice that they had lost their tread. With a yelp, I continued to glide along the kitchen's polished pine floors. "You are late!" And she was right. I was late, and I had no one to blame but myself. I had been the caretaker of the shop for 6 months, and still I seemed to forget my most important responsibility that came with the job: watering the tree. I ran by my grandmother, not bothering to stop and say hello or even wave. I ran through the kitchen and through the door that led to the main part of the shop. The over 200-year-old birch tree grew in the middle of the large room, and even in the middle of winter was decorated with bright white, smooth bark and green leaves. Its trunk divided halfway up its length, and its branches reached for the skylight in the ceiling. A spiral staircase wove around the tree, leading to the children's fairy loft and my apartment on the second floor of the giant house. Faulkner, the shop crow, perched on his favorite spot, the second branch from the very top, and stared down at me in his best judgy manner. "You're late. You're late for a very important date." Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had Alice in Wonderland in mind on account of my latest scrape. Faulkner had come to my grandmother's back door as a young bird with a broken wing, and when she nursed him back to health, he had just decided to stay. He'd had the run of the shop until my cat and I moved in. My black and white tuxedo cat, Emerson, was strangely MIA. He was usually the first on the scene when there was any promise of commotion. Emerson loved commotion, loved being in the midst of it, and he certainly loved making it. A ring of about 6 inches from the tree to the edge of the hardwood floor circled the birch. I sprinkled the precious water from the watering can into the dirt. When I shook the last drop from the can, I half expected something to happen, but, like always, nothing did. The tree only reacted when it wasn't watered on schedule. Then it showed its age. The leaves began to brown and bark began to peel. It seemed that the magical spring water was the only thing that had kept it alive and out of hibernation the last 2 centuries, and the water had to be straight from the spring. I couldn't collect it beforehand because it seemed to lose its magical properties. I had learned in the short time that I had been caretaker of the tree and the shop that the magic didn't care what I thought. The magic was much subtler and came from the books themselves. I gave a sigh of relief. My most important job was done. The tree wouldn't need water for another 48 hours. I promised myself and the tree I wouldn't forget again. "Violet!" my grandmother called from the kitchen. I lowered my head like a young child who knew she was about to be scolded. Before I had been the caretaker of the shop, it had been my grandmother's job after her mother had passed it on to her over 50 years ago. I would have been willing to bet that in all that time she had never once forgotten to water the tree, and she certainly hadn't ever run through the woods like a crazy person. "Violet!" my grandmother called again. "Off with her head!" Faulkner cried from his perch. I squinted up at the bird, so not helping. He fluffed his feathers to appear larger and walked up and down his favorite tree branch, bobbing his head. There's nothing quite as humiliating as a crow making fun of you, even if you are the only one to see it. "Violet!" Grandma Daisy called a third time. Her tone was a tad more urgent than the last time. I gave Faulkner one more withering glare, and then I headed to the kitchen. I pushed open the kitchen door, but Grandma Daisy wasn't there. She was in the neighboring room. The office/storage room had been the dining room back when the original house was built in 1813, just after the Battle of Lake Erie. When my great-grandmother had turned the house into a bookshop, the room had become the warehouse room where we received and sorted the books. I frowned as I saw that the room was in complete disarray again. Books, papers, and files were scattered across the computer desk and over the large dining table in the middle of the room that we used.